I'm not disagree with the idea, but the only thing that we need to keep our eyes open, our innovation, our lab, our strategy, policy, to open to the all option, not to limit it ourselves to one option only and to market it as the only option that will solve the climate change. And by the way, now, renewable and solar especially, it is good as a big shaving. It's cheap as a big shaving. When it's combined with the batteries, the price will be different, the story will be different. So we're still ahead of, or do we need to enter to that argument that whether it will be a renewable full stop or a mix of energy? I don't think it will be wise to enter in such discussion or to make such framing to the argument. In my opinion, we need all sorts of energy. The world demand on the energy is growing. We need to step up the cooperation and to provide energy wherever it needs.
Keith, let me just bring in Keith on that question. Do you feel, as the CEO of a major international company, that you're getting clarity of policy decision to follow, or is there some inconsistency as a result of the concerns the minister's expressing?
I think there's inconsistency. I think initially renewables, in order to be effective, had to be subsidised, and therefore anybody that had invested in thermal simply lost out. And in Germany, anybody that invested tens of billions in thermal, that value was just eroded away, and that was reflected in share price. So that's hard in the future world, if you've got new investment decisions to make, to go to your board, your supervisory board, and invest tens of billions unless you've got certainty. So I think there's a bigger role for governments to play in terms of ensuring either a market is liberalised and competes on cost, or if it's subsidised, it's clear rules around how. Otherwise, you'll simply starve yourself of investment. And to take the UK, for example, it's the first time in 100 years that the UK has not burned coal since the Industrial Revolution because of the change of renewables. And at the same time, nobody is willing to invest in thermal generation in the UK without subsidy now, because otherwise you simply cannot compete against the government that can change the rules when you play it.
And is that, like the minister says, do you think, down, sort of suppressing the potential investment that could go into new technologies, let's say in clean coal and some other things?
I think without a shadow of a doubt there's a cost to that, because people will always think in terms of how long will it take me to recoup my investment. But I do think we're talking about geographies. I think in Europe it's pretty clear where renewables have been established for a long time because of subsidisation. I think in the rest of the world we're seeing gas emerge as a direct competitor to oil, and it's beaten oil hands down. It's cheaper than oil and more efficient than oil. And I think we're seeing some great technological advances, FSRUs, high efficiency CCGTs. But anybody that makes those investments, first question you're going to ask, am I going to get my money back? And therefore you need to consider very carefully where you place those investments and what's the government strategy or the region's strategy to make that real.
Before I go to the floor, I would like to ask you to comment on the question I made to the Minister Mazrui as a kind of follow-on from what I just asked you. How big a factor is President Trump now in that sort of predictability? The idea of pulling out of the Paris Agreement, so where is carbon as a policy implement, the Iran decision not going with full implementation. Generally speaking, is it a big factor in predictability?
I think Mr. Trump is actually very predictable, to be fair. America first. He says it very clearly, he articulates it, he does it. And I think he's sitting on a wealth of natural resource. You know, with all of the shale gas that's available and shale oil, he's converted himself to a short, to a long, and therefore he'll benefit from that. And that's a strategy, and you see it.
But a month ago, if you had asked everybody on this floor for $100 bet on whether he was going to give waivers on Iran, I doubt anybody in this room would have taken that bet.
Yeah, but I think everybody forgot about driving season in the US and headline price of gas oil being very key in terms of, you know, the average voter's perception of whether they're getting a good deal from the pump or not. And clearly he made very clear he didn't like those high prices, he's seen it as unsustainable, he didn't like it and he was going to change it, and that's why he claims credit for changing it. So again, this policy is very clear. Political expediency, low oil price at that moment in time is good, therefore it made sense, despite the fact, I guess the US
he
is
loves
our
coal. Would you spend $10 billion investing in a coal plant in America based on Trump likes coal? I mean, it's kind of a short-term...
I think in terms of Mr. Trump saying that he likes coal, I think what he's saying is he didn't like it not being favoured against subsidies from other things.
Okay.
And I think, again, I don't see many people investing in new coal mines, but what you do see is very healthy coal demand, and actually coal is at one of the highest points of being exported from the US than at any time in history.
Germany, one of the biggest markets.
Ironically, Mr. Trump, despite the fact he's pulled out of the Paris Accords, because of shale gas, there's a lot more gas in the system, there's a lot more renewable in the system, and as coal has gone elsewhere in the world. So the US is one of the few countries where carbon has actually gone down. It's a crazy
That's what
world.
happened last time in the Kyoto as well.
Yes.
So there was a question in the front row here we'll take.
I have a question for His Highness
Any bottles
Dr.
of water, please? Please, bud.
I have a question for His Highness and
His Excellency.
first, His Excellency.
You
I
could
would like
promote it,
to.
though.
I would like to congratulate you on the project in Masdar City, and I just have a question because I've been studying it recently, and it's a fantastic project you have going there at the moment. But I wanted to ask the question, and the question is how far do you think like the project in Masdar City is going to develop in a few, maybe say 10 to 15 years time? Because I approve of green energy being used around the world, and I think Germany is one of the biggest players there. But how do you think the UAE will compete in terms of using actual green energy and developing it more than Masdar?
You're talking about sustainable
Yes,
cities.
sustainable city.
Well, I mean, the sustainable city concept is a growing concept around the world. Every mayor, every municipality, they would like to change their city to municipal city and to reduce the emission, CO2 emission. Sustainable city concept changing the way that we do in business, the way we live. But there is some challenging to that. There is an existing infrastructure. It needs to be either upgraded or to be replaced. Who is going to pay for that? Is it the government or is it the consumer? There is a question of cyber security. How are we going to do with that? So there is a lot of issues surrounding sustainable city. But it's a good concept. It will enable us to change our life to better, but it's not free of challenging at the moment.
What is your view on the definition of sustainable city? Because clearly it's a big headline. Everybody's got a kind of different view. What's your view, young man, millennial man? What is a sustainable city?
Well, there's been like a notion of like whether the actual raw energy that we're using in terms of oil and stuff like that is going to be depleted in the next 50 to maybe 100 odd years time. But I personally don't think it will ever deplete. I think it will be in line with clean energy, like they'll be able to use both parts and able to make it, say, very consistent in terms of use. But
Thank you. Can we pass the microphone? Please.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the panelists for being over here and providing us with an opportunity for a question.
Just a little bit louder, please.
Yeah, I would like to thank the panelists for being over here and providing us with an opportunity to ask questions. I completely agree with all of the panelists in their separate viewpoints. I agree with James when he said that, the millennials moving forward have their own viewpoint of how we should move forward with having a differentiation between renewables and non-renewables. I agree with the Excellency when he says that we need to keep our options open. It's a big industry and you need not to be confined to one particular industry. I also agree with Keith when he says there's an inconsistency when the definition is coming from the top order. My question to the panelists over here is that we being millennials moving forward, what do you think should be the key indicators to decide when we're going to invest or when we're moving forward? the key indicators when deciding whether to invest in a renewable energy source, whether to invest in non-renewable energy source, whether it's the government sovereignty, whether it's the actual economical benefit that we're going to get out of it, or whether it's just a new indication that the world is moving ahead, the world is going to renewable energies, we're seeing to electric cars and other sources of industry.
Okay, I would suspect that it's the old-fashioned thing, nothing changes. What's the return on your investment? But please.
So the interesting answer that I'll give you is I don't think the millennials' perspective is any different to anybody's investment perspective. I think you come up to a helicopter view, you ask yourself, if I'm going to invest in energy, why am I investing in it, and what am I looking for as a return from it? Now, there is an aspect of, if you like, Sean's point about taking a simple return on the value of my investment. I suspect that increasingly that's not going to be the whole part of the question. We're already seeing major investment funds actually taking positions where they say, I will not invest in hydrocarbons at all. Now that's out there as part of the dialogue.
Famously, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund.
Absolutely. I don't personally take that approach. I invest across the energy spectrum because I believe that a balanced energy equation is the right way to go. The thing that I would pick up on with regards to the question that Sean asked Keith around Donald Trump is if Donald Trump is teaching the world anything, is that there will be a tendency going forward for countries to be saying to themselves, what does energy security look like for me? Now the United States is clearly taking a very strong position on that because it has the luxury of extensive shale gas reserves, it has the luxury of extensive coal reserves, as Keith quite rightly pointed out. But the question that they are asking themselves and coming up with the answer is unique to them. There's not an economy or a country in the world that shouldn't be asking itself the same question. And His Excellency pointed out that in the underdeveloped parts of the world, they perhaps actually don't have the richness to take a balanced perspective on that. So when you're trying to provide electricity to a small village in Middle Africa, turning around and trying to develop a hydrocarbons policy is pretty useless. So for me, I would be saying to you, spread your investment across the spectrum, but the question which I will always come back to, in each of those verticals, who is doing what they do really well, and stay away from inefficiency. And that also counts for the oil and gas sector.
Keith, your thoughts on that? Obviously, you're making these decisions all the time. What's your advice?
I think if you look, I'm a historian.